Welcome, everyone. We are going to start our STEM research statements panel discussion. This is part of our future faculty series. If you have missed any of our previous panel discussions or workshops, please do review the information on your emails on how to access the call app so you can watch all the recordings. If you need assistance during the event, we do have Sam Lake on the chat. She's our Assistant Director for Research Communications. We also have other members of the PhD Plus team here today, Melanie Sinch and Kelly Bowman. And today I'm going to be the moderator. I'm the Assistant Director of Postdoc Affairs at the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Affairs, or GPA, at the University of Virginia. We have some upcoming future faculty events. The series is not yet done. I think we're halfway through. The feedback sessions, we will be sending more information on how to sign up for those ones very soon. Then we have the reflective teaching statements. This is the same content that was shared on June 26th, in case you missed it. The interview, then we will have sessions on interviewing for faculty positions, and I believe this session is in person. In the PhD Plus fall writing retreats, which they start August 30th, and they have many dates, and all this information is also on the website. Next slide, Sam. We do have other events happening. For those of you that are joining, the recording for the letters of recommendation and revising and refining is available. This was part of our grant and fellowship writing series. And the Science Policy Fellowship Workshop is August 15. And there is an NNSA Graduate Fellowship Program info session, September 15. And again, all this information for all the events is on the PhD Plus website in the events tab. And with that, let me introduce the panel today. We have Nicholas Chapkin. He is an assistant professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Yale University and then moved to University of Virginia, where I had the pleasure to meet him. Then we also have today joining us Katia Casimares. She is the assistant professor in biology at the University of Virginia, and she was before a Banting postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto. And we have also joining Yoshi Miyazaki. He will start an assistant professorship at Rogers University in January. And he's currently a Stanback postdoctoral research associate at the Caltech Center for Comparative Planetary Evolution. And they are here because they have all recently completed successfully and faculty search. And so we are hoping that you can get a lot of information from their experience on this on previous years. And so let me just very quickly pin all of my panelists. There we go. And so we're going to start with just a brief overview of an introduction of your current role and briefly state your faculty journey in a nutshell. And we're going to start with Yoshi.
Thank you, Fatima. And hello, everyone. As Fatima just introduced me, I'm Ayoshi Miyazaki. I'm currently a postdoc at Caltech. Just very briefly about my research, I am in the field of Earth and planetary sciences. It's a huge field, but what I'm basically interested is how rocky planets like ours have formed and how evolved after it formed. An overall goal of my research is to understand why our planet has been able to host life and be able to develop surface conditions that's really perfect for developing life forms. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I I just accepted my offer from Rutgers. I have been in our field. Basically, we keep applying as from the moment we get a PhD. So I've been on the job market for 4 years, and I have applied for many institutes, particularly in the United States. And I just received an offer this year. So yeah, I hope I could um, clarify some of the questions that you have in this application. Thanks.
Thank you, Yoshi. We're gonna go with Katya.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Katya Kasmanis. I'm an assistant professor here at UVA in the biology department, and my lab is generally interested in studying the genomics of sexual conflict. I was a postdoc for 4 years and got my job in my fourth year. I did really kind of one big push on the job market. And I'm happy to share what that experience was like and kind of how to navigate all of that. I think that's yeah, my journey in a nutshell.
Thank you, Katya. Nick?
Yeah, everyone. My name is Nick Chavkin. Thank you, Fatima, and for inviting me, and then everyone else for organizing this. So starting at the beginning, very briefly, I have my background and training in biomedical engineering and bioengineering. Moved more towards vascular development for my postdoctoral training, and then cardiovascular disease. Getting kind of co-trained by two different mentors, and then so that was at the University of Virginia for the most part, and that's where I met Fatima and worked closely with her. I looked back. My first application that I submitted was February 2022, and I signed an offer letter March 2024. So it was a little over 2 years of full-on applications. So that includes one failed round and then one successful round. I'm happy to talk about both.
Thank you so much for those introductions. So as we field questions on the chat, we're gonna start with a quick question in terms of where do you start drafting a research statement and how will you do things differently now, knowing what you already know about the process of applying for a faculty position? And we're gonna start with Nick.
Yeah. So the way let's see, the way I did it was, and I think my recommendation would be, is you have to start with something you really are passionate about. Um, it's something that you have to really want to do this and drive to it, because it's going to essentially the general underlying hypothesis that you're going to set up your lab to study has to be simple. It has to be exciting to you because you have to explain it to a group of uh, faculty members who don't necessarily know you or your research, and really convince them that this is the best thing to do and that you're the best person to do it. So if it's not just your absolute most amazing idea, or at least direction, and something that you're really passionate about, it's just not going to come off as genuine. So do that. Find that idea that you really want to pursue, for whatever reason or another. Just find that and then build off of that. What experiments would you run? What things would you do to help test that hypothesis? And that essentially builds your research statement. From there, that's what I would recommend. I think when I started writing that type of hypothesis, that type of work I was a little too broad with it. Um, and the more specific I got, the more directed I got, the more I could convince people, the more that I knew what I was doing, and the more I convinced people that I knew what I was doing. And so I think as it evolved, um, it got a little better that way. So that's where I would recommend starting with. Um, and yeah, I can hand it off to other people.
Katya, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I think you know, I'll echo Nick in that finding something that you're really passionate about is really important, and something that you feel really comfortable talking about a lot because you're going to have to explain it to people and really break it down, and be able to talk about it in people in your field in detail, people outside of your field who maybe don't know all of the jargon. So you need to be really comfortable in that, and I think that's easier when you're really passionate about the question. Um, I think the best advice that I got was to start writing my research statement the first year of my postdoc, and to start doing that straight away. And that's actually something I did. And the reason I found it very helpful, is because I realized some of the things I really wanted to do and propose doing in my lab weren't necessarily skills that I was incredibly confident in yet. And so it gave me an opportunity in my postdoc training to know these are skills I need to pick up. These are some projects I should work on, so that when I put together this set of, experiments and questions that I'm going to put forward, the search committee and the departments who are interviewing me have confidence that I can be successful in those and do them. So being able to think ahead and then tailor your postdoc training to help you reach those goals, would be my best advice.
Thank you, Katya. Yoshi, would you like to add anything from your experience?
Yeah, I totally echo Katya and Nick, and I in that aspect I don't really have a thing to add. So I will answer the question in a little different way, in the sense that as kind of both mentioned, my advice will be to start writing your research statement right away, like even as of right now, because the one you're going to write right now is definitely never going to be the right one you're going to submit. It's going to have to go through multiple round of revisions, and as a papers or statements or proposal or everything, and like as you write, you kind of solidify your ideas and it goes to evolve as you write it. So that's the reason I really strongly support to like write it right away. And once you have it, it definitely should have to go through a multiple round of revisions for my eyes. And I think one of the most helpful things I had was to be looked by multiple people, and a lot of my friends ended up being in faculty at all these great institutions, and they provided really critical comments. And through those, they will basically drive your way in a sense that it's something has some things what you write has to be something that's really interesting and passionate about what just as Nick said, and those things won't it's not an easy thing, so it takes time and it goes through a multiple round of revision. So that's why and revisions and writing through immediately will definitely help in that aspect. So that's I guess and my answer to I'm basically just echoing what to those who said, but in a kind of more in a practical way. I think that's my answer to the questions.
Thank you. I think it's great that you mentioned having passion for this long-term research agenda, because you do go through so many iterations, as Yoshi mentioned, of the same statement. And if you lack that passion, that can become repetitive. Um, I think a good follow-up question based on that will be to how does that process of building a long-term agenda look like? How was it completely different in your graduate and postdoc work? Do you integrated those into this new agenda? Was it a mix, or was it something completely new? Let's start with, oh, go ahead, Nick.
I mean, I can answer quickly because I think as well as Kati mentioned, you need to have the feasibility in what you're doing, right? So you need to already be able to do what you're going to propose to do. But building kind of the long-term research direction is it's tricky. And also kind of talking about what Yoshi said, I of course also had a lot of people read over it. I will say though that I didn't take everyone's advice, especially not necessarily direct mentors, because that's one of the things you have to do in building your own research lab is a little bit more independence from your research mentors, and they might be thinking differently than you, and that's not the worst thing in the world. find your independent way. So that type of kind of long-term research direction, when you're starting to build it, it has to be something you can do, but not necessarily something that your direct mentors are going to also do, if that makes sense. But I can move it on.
Katya, Joshi, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I think I started in grad school keeping a question notebook. And I still add things to that when you read a paper, or you talk to someone, or you just have an idea sometime. And so that was helpful to like go back through that and see like, are those still valid questions? Do I still find them interesting? And that's really helpful. I think the biggest thing for me was, leaving grad school and moving into a postdoc is kind of transitioning my brain from being really in the weeds and thinking at the experiment level to taking a step back and thinking like, what are the foundational questions in my field, and what gaps still exist, or what are new ways we can address these. And so trying to shift my perspective, and that really helped me figure out what are the big overarching questions that are going to motivate my lab in the first 5 years. And then you can narrow that down to more specific projects and areas. And a lot of that is reading and just spending time reflecting, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Yoshi?
I also had that sort of idea notebook that that, and as I think as everyone, it's not something that you want to write in a proposal. It's just gonna come up immediately, like when you start writing, it just kind of pops up to you. It kind of need time to like accumulate and polish. So definitely that kind of ideas again to have it some saved in somewhere would have helped in the starting point. But at the same time, I think what I struggled with, kind of the scale of your problem. It's not something it's immediately obvious to everyone. I think at least it wasn't for me. How big the problem should be that what you write in a proposal. And I think it also depends on your field or what you're specifically doing. But proposal has to be something. It's a feasible, and what you write in a research statement should be feasible. At the same time, should be like a big enough so that it sounds exciting to the people who reads it, and especially in your research team, it's not going to be read by you who's an expert on it, but in the field, in a greater field in general. So you have to kind of tailor it towards to be able to convince people that what you're doing is interesting, but at the same time, it is something that's been manageable in the typical way, tenure track time frame, so like 6 to 7 years. So that is something I like obviously when I started writing, it's when I wrote, I think it was an interesting proposal, but at the same time, when I started, it was a little too small, and as it kind of had a conversation with other people and like being looked at, they added something like it's not immediately obvious to people who are outside the field, and for some people read it doesn't sound feasible. That kind of comment kind of really polished in a way that it's some of the right level of the theme that's at least convincing to the search committees, and that's how my statements evolve throughout the my application journey.
Thank you. Thank you for those perspectives. We do have a question from the audience, and I'm going to add to this question, prefacing this question into your own specific fields. I know you all have different areas of research. And the question is, can we get some more specific examples of research statements? Something more concrete in terms of what is the usual format, how long it needs to be, how much to spend on each of the parts of the research statement, and maybe the style of that research statement in your specific fields. And we're going to start with Katya.
Yeah, so I will say this is going to differ across every place you apply, probably. So for me personally, I predominantly applied to R1 schools. I had a very small handful of PUIs and of med schools. And the both length and framing of those were different. So I'm going to focus on the R1 type of research statement. I had two different master versions. I had a 2-page version, which basically had an introduction and then just my future directions. And I had a 3-page version, which included past research or ongoing research in addition to those other 2 components. I think everywhere I applied across university types, it was either 2 or 3 pages was the maximum for the research statement. I do think it's really important to start with your big questions and defining who you are as a scientist in that first paragraph. Some of these search committees are reading hundreds of applications and they might not read the whole thing, or everyone in the department might be given a long list and they might just skip it. And so you want them, the very first thing they see is to know who you are, what are the questions, and why they should be excited about you. So I probably spent the most time crafting that first paragraph. And then, I had 3 research themes for my future research directions that all integrated under my kind of big questions. My first research theme was directly building on my postdoc work, taking it in a new direction. It was something I could clearly lay out and say, this is a grant that I can submit to NIH as an R01 grant. My second one was a little bit more in the middle. It capitalized on a lot of the skills I had, but it was moving into a new area. And then my third one was kind of my more broad, exploratory type of question and how I'd be pushing my research in kind of not only a new direction for me, but in a completely distinct direction from all the labs I'd previously been in. And so I think having that combination of things to play off of big picture and concreteness and showing that you could be fundable was the balance I was going for, and what I was advised to do as well.
Thank you for that, Katya. We are having a lot of questions in the chat, and so if there's any additional thing that you would like to add, Yoshi or Nick, otherwise we'll move to the next question. All right. So the next question, I'm going to give this question to Yoshi. How do you balance pursuing a research area that you're passionate about with pursuing an area that is fundable and competitive with other applicants? And maybe an extra part of that question will be, how do you also balance aligning with the department and the university in that research capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my case, as Kat had explained, my research statement for the third one, it was actually very similar. So, but for my case, the third topic that I chose was, in the sense that it's a little more similar to what I've been pursuing. And then the first and second one was applying my skill set to a completely different area, and to kind of propose a new direction, which hasn't been really pursued by anybody in the field. So I think what the strategy was for me was that, when you're going to propose something new or passionate about, um, it will basically be a very big selling point, but at the same time, you have to be convincing. So in the sense that I wrote the statement in the sense that I will be doing something new, but I was writing in a sense that I am very comfortable doing it because I can directly apply what I've been doing in that new field. That's obviously not always necessarily the case, but you can definitely write in a sense that, okay, there are a lot of similarities that what I've been doing versus what I'm going to pursue. And so that's, in that sense, I can create a confident result in this new field. So that's how I was trying to sell it in a way that it is fundable. And at the same time, when I do I was trying to do something very new. So that was also selling in a sense that that's something that not be done by my previous PIs or my colleagues at my current institutes. So that it will be a very competitive proposals, because I think that's going to come up very soon in next. But a lot of the people who really care about is that, why you? Because if you are just going to do something that's similar to where postdocs or PhD topics, the natural question will be that your PIs will they be able to do it better than how you do it. So that's something where I really cared about when I'm writing my statements.
Thank you, Yoshi. Um, Nick, the next question from the participants is in similar, we're all talking about this balance that you have to provide. And so how do you balance proposing independent standalone research with the potential for doing collaborations, whether that is within the same institute or outside? The example that they give for this question is if you are in bio working with the School of Medicine, at prospective institutions, if any, how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so you should be applying to departments with people you want to work with and who want to work with you. So some of that is um, uh, that you could potentially have collaborative studies with those people. I think any search committee would understand that those collaborations would not start immediately, of course, uh, because you have to build your own lab, and that takes a lot of effort and time and resources. But once that is built and you are in your space doing your core work, how can that integrate well with the department? And some of that is just an overall kind of departments tend to try to have critical mass in a certain area to be kind of an expert broadly in a certain area to either attract grad students or bring kind of an identity to the department. And so that's really, if you're talking about collaborative work within the department, that's really where you want to be, is part of that uh, overall big push to have a critical mass in some type of idea. So if you can be somewhat in that by connecting to other people within the department. So for example, that I didn't put that in my research statement. I put that more in my cover letter of like people in the department who I would be very happy to work with, kind of, for example, and other kind of bigger ideas and directions. But you could, I guess, technically, you could do that in your research statement as well. And kind of at the end is saying, I think like these two projects or these two directions will work really well with these ongoing labs. You don't want to overlap with them. You want to work with them. Um, and then, but I would, so I did not talk too much about more collaborative work broadly because I felt the advice that I got is that search committees are looking for you to be independent. They're not looking for you to build a web of connections that will make you more of a core lab. You don't want to be a core lab. You want to be your own independent direction that can bring in independent funding that's not dependent on anyone else. So you have to really convince people that within your research statement that these are exciting, interesting directions that you don't need anyone else's help to do. You can do those, and then kind of suggest that once you're there and set up, you can work with other people on specific projects. But I tended to not emphasize collaborative work, just that I am collaborative, but not specific research projects that I would think about doing necessarily. That, yeah.
Thank you for that, Nick. Katya, Yoshi, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I think when they're trying to hire people, at least in our field, they definitely do want some overlap, and they definitely want to have some conversation with the new among the faculties. And when they hire new people, they definitely are thinking about that aspect. But I don't think you know, the merit of hiring is to think about the potential new collaborations, but it's more rather about can they share the science they're talking about in the broad sense. So um you should definitely do some research and think about what sort of conversation you could have with the faculty members over there. But I don't think you should not be spending a huge amount of time thinking about all the potential collaborations and write it down in your statement. But casually mentioned like, oh, we could definitely talk about a number of topics and X and Y and Z, and that maybe end of the research statement or at end of the cover letter. I think that will be a good catch.
I guess I'll just add, since I got the opportunity to like be on the other side right after I got here and see us do multiple searches. That question of kind of fit and collaboration, and would this person interact well in our department? Do they bring something new but not too different? A lot of that didn't really come up till the in-person interview stage. When we're actually reading research statements, it was really looking on people who were proposing novel, exciting, groundbreaking science. And that was a lot more important. So I think in your research statement, you can focus a little bit more on you. Obviously, don't ignore the context of the department. If they have a legacy of being strong in something and you would add to that, or you expand something in a new way, highlight that. But I don't think you need to focus on, exactly what your life would look like in that department in your research statement.
Thank you. We are gonna pass to our question for the whole panel. And so what are some good strategies to differentiate your research statement from your mentor's research? Whether that is the postdoc research or the graduate school research. And let's start with Yoshi.
Yeah. So I think a good strategy will be again, it's to kind of think about what's kind of thing what you can only do in the research field. Especially when you are just kind of crafting a research statement right after a PhD. It's basically you are basically narrowed down to what you'll be working on, and that will be more of an expansion of what you'll be doing, and that's definitely exciting, and that's maybe a thing that you will be fundable. But at the same time, I think those kind of things will be be able to be done by also be your advisors or PIs. And so it's, the good strategy, I think it's not an easy fix, but to always think about what's the thing that you can only do. And when you start applying for postdocs, or when you're already doing a postdoc stage, think about the research topic in the next few years, in the sense that how can I combine what you've been working on, in a sense, and what you can do, but that what new things you can do in the next few years that can be what you're really original to yourself. So I don't think it's something that you can, start thinking about right now and can kind of come up in the next, maybe in a few hours, but it's rather more the things that you should actively continue to think about in that, um, what's the thing that my peers are good at, but like not really strong at. How can I combine my strengths in the field that can really come up in a sense that's unique to yourself. That's what I can only do, and that kind of competitive and repetitive thinking will end up creating something that's really new to you. So I think that's my answer.
Thank you, Yoshi. Katya?
Um, I guess I agree with all of that. So I guess from a slightly different perspective, I'd say start having conversations with your advisors really early on, especially your postdoc advisors. Like, what parts of your project can you take with you? What's staying in their lab? Have very clearly defined kind of expectations of what's going to happen. The worst thing is to think that you're taking something with you, or to be planning a research program around something and then find out at the last minute that your advisor actually is not going to let you take that project. It's also worth having conversations if you're not part of the grant writing process with them. Try to find out what they're getting funded and like what direction they're moving in, because you also don't want to be directly competing with them for money, because you will never win out straight away. So I think I guess my advice would be to have these open and honest conversations with your advisor. If that's not something you have a relationship with them that you feel like you can do, find someone else in your department that can help facilitate that, because they're absolutely critical.
Nick?
Yes, I'll just echo what both Kat and Yoshi said, but also just to emphasize that so there are two very important reasons why you have to distinguish yourself from your mentors. work. One is exactly that you can't compete with your mentor for funding. And two is even if you have a great relationship and you are collaborative and you have and you can see co-grants go in there. First of all, if you are the main PI in that, study sections are not going to like essentially just funding your main lab's extension. It doesn't. They want you to be. They want to fund independent work, not give your PI another half of an R01 essentially. So not only the study section run, but anything you do with your mentor as an assistant professor doesn't count towards promotion and tenure as much as anything else that should be independent. They want to see an independent lab. So if you're working really closely with your mentor, you're not pushing your own promotion qualifications. And tenure qualifications. So lots of really good reasons to be independent. So to not go over too much, I'll just tell you my own experiences. I started as a postdoc in a developmental vascular biology lab, and the first conversation about career that I had with my mentor was that I wanted to do the faculty route. I wanted to be a PI at an R1 institution, and I want to work in cardiovascular disease. I want to take these developmental mechanisms and apply them to disease. And we both agreed that that's great, that she would not, of course, be interested in that. And it seems like a good direction. And she even helped me set up essentially a second postdoc at the same time. So I had co-mentor postdocs with someone who could teach me more cardiovascular disease. In retrospect, so that was the idea, was to learn two aspects and kind of meet in the middle so that I could have kind of more of my own independent lab. That was the plan. I think that's essentially what happened. Of course, things go wrong and lots of things happen. And I would also say that strategy was not great for getting independent career development funding for lots of other reasons and timing and issues. But that's how, so I had that conversation very early and had a plan very early and set that up from the start so that there would be no issues about what I would do in my independent lab. So that would be my advice as well.
Thank you all for those perspectives. I think, as Nick mentioned, and all of you, that distinction with your mentor is important even when you're applying to transition grants and fellowships. That will distinguish you from what your mentor's doing and what that segregation on what becomes independent research and what doesn't. That is important to highlight from the very beginning. I think we have a natural follow-up question from the public. How, and any of you can answer this, please do chime in as you like. How does your postdoc experience help you to have better research statement and be more competitive in the job market? In other words, how can I take advantage of my current postdoc position to be more competitive when applying for a faculty position? Who wants to start?
I can answer quickly. The answer I see to that is publications, and that may or may not be the best answer or most supportive answer. But your postdoc is leverage your publications to support your research statement, because the committees or search committees are going to not trust your question and not trust that you can answer your questions or that your questions are good if you don't have the publication record to back it up. You need to be a published good scientist with a track record to say, yes, the research statement that I have is good. And you can trust me, because lots of people can propose novel ideas. One of the big questions in what you have to do with your postdoc research and that experience is support that you can answer those questions, because you've answered other questions in the past.
Joshi, Katya, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think Nick got the big one, but I'll say your postdoc's an opportunity to get leadership experience, especially if that's not something you did a lot in grad school, whether that's mentorship, serving on a committee in your department, being the instructor of record on a course, depending on what kind of institution you're planning to go to next. I'd say leverage the fact that you don't have coursework, or your postdoc in some ways is beautiful because maybe the most flexible your time ever gets to be. And it's the worst because you have the least like financial security of any point in your career. So it's that like balance. But I would say it's an opportunity to like think ahead, think about what are the other areas of your CV you can strengthen. And generally, in my experience, there were a lot of opportunities to fill or boost those areas.
Joshi, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think in I will answer a little differently in that sense. And I think the postdoc are can experience can differ very largely depending on the field. And in our field, a lot of postdocs, like in my case, I was funded directly from the department, so that I was working with some of the faculty members at the at Caltech, but at the same time, I had the freedom, also had the freedom to pursue what I was proposing myself. So in that sense, I was able to test and kind of ideas that was doing was actually being feasible. That kind of sort of experience directly built up on writing proposals. Um, so yeah, and especially I know in the kind of field of biology, you have to, you have to have a conversation what to bring, what to not. But in our field, it was like, especially I'm a modeling per people, I do not need the lab, and I was basically doing all my work on my laptop. So, um, in that sense, it's really easy to do your own work, but at the same time, you have to be able to come up with something that's not be easily done by others. So, um, I did not have any conversation with my PI. I didn't. I really. My statement was never shared with my PIs because I kind of had a sense of kind of insecurity that and it's not only me, but I think when I talk to other people, it was common among our field that they're not really sharing the ideas with the PIs at the time of application, even after you get your faculty position. Um, so but in the sense that once you develop your ideas, you can always test your ideas, and kind of doing that experience would definitely help a lot in the sense of to come up with a convincing statement that because you already have the experience of working on those, that was kind of the uh, best thing that I was able to get use of my postdoc time, and also my kind of funding situations of like fellowships that I took advantage of.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna do a shameless plug and say Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Affairs do have a lot of opportunities for you to develop yourself on writing, on fellowship applications, grant writing, communications. Um, you can join the PDA if you want leadership positions. We do have opportunities for you to develop those leadership skills, and even the teaching reflection statements and workshops like that. We as the PhD Plus team and postdoc affairs do have a lot of opportunities for you to get the most out of the postdoc. And even if you have no idea where to start, the career design class for postdocs and the ones for graduate students do help you figure out those transfer skills so you can follow to the next step with confidence. All right. There's actually a lot of questions. We have a question regarding the application process. And this is because lately it's been highly competitive and it becomes a bit daunting for postdocs to be on this process. So how do you develop the confidence to start and continue the application process? And likewise, what tips do you have for persevering when it seems futile? And I want to add to this question, please talk a little bit more about your experience, maybe with consecutive applications and or with different rounds of applications that you've had. I think you guys have a lot of experience on that too. Anyone
I
wants
can,
to
I can
start?
start again. Yeah, just to talk to this again. Just to remind, um, I went through an entire year of unsuccessful applications, and then the second year in I guess successful because I got a position, but there's a lot of failure. I think I don't know, a 10% rate on getting the Zoom interview afterwards. So there's a lot of question. It's a lot of questioning yourself on, are you good enough, or is this really the direction that you want to go? I would recommend, and what worked for me was just kind of flipping it. Don't really ask yourself if you are good enough at that point. Really focus on how can you be better? How can you get to a better place? How can you improve your own research statement? How can you improve your ideas? Not necessarily, well, why didn't they like this? More, well, how can I get to a better spot and improve it? If you're constantly trying to improve your own research direction, your own research statement, your own research ideas, improve your CV in all the ways that Katya and Yoshi and are talking about, and Fatima is uh, um, uh, promoting through the PhD Plus program. If you're constantly trying to improve yourself, then I think that's a better way to approach exactly how competitive and daunting the application process is. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I I totally echo that. I struggled a lot through my application processes, and especially it's because Earth and planetary science is a huge field, yet in a sense, like it's a really diverse field, but we don't have a lot of positions. So, so when I look at all these job advertisements, it says like, okay, a lot of says like, and all 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 field of Earth and planetary science are welcome to apply, but in a lot of cases they already have some specific field in mind, and they just want to make it broad so that they don't miss a really good candidate. Um, so in that sense, I think what I feel is like they've advertisements that was really suited for me was very small in numbers. So, and I think there's still two ways to get a job. Like one is had to be exceptionally good so that nobody every time you applied, you basically get snatched and became invited for an interview. But at the other way is to keep applying and to find a job that's really in, apply for a job that's really wants you. In the sense, I think that's what happened for me, and where I got an interviews, because they wanted somebody who does research like what I do, and you don't necessarily know that beforehand. So I know it is really hard, and there was multiple times I definitely wanted to stop applying, but you definitely need to have that kind of perseverance to keep applying until you find a good match, and that's often the most important thing, that you get a jobs. I-
Um, I guess I'll add a couple of things because I think this was all really good advice. And I want to start with just acknowledging it is incredibly challenging. It is incredibly exhausting. And there were multiple points where I thought, if I don't get a job, I don't know if I can do this again. So acknowledge that is part of the process. Unfortunately, that's just kind of, it's highly competitive. And so you have to psych yourself up and just keep pushing forward. And my way of doing that was, one, to put on blinders. If you start comparing yourself to what friends or what other people in the field are doing or their experiences are, it can get really toxic. So just focus on you, focus on being the best scientist that you can put forward. Celebrate every single small success. If you make it on a long list, you have won. Like, that is a huge deal. Even if you just get a Zoom pre-interview, that's still a really big deal. You've still risen to the top of their list. And so celebrate that and count that as a win. And keep all of those in mind. And then try to find someone who can be your cheerleader. So one of my postdoc advisors was kind of always there checking in. I felt like we went through this together. He texted me every morning before my interviews started to wish me good luck, and he checked in on me, and like have someone in your life who can be that person for you, because it makes such a huge difference to help you stay positive and to know that there are people about you who believe in you and care about you and your success, and just keeps you in the right frame of mind.
Thank you all for that great advice. I do think this is an incredibly long process, and not only long, but it's full of questions all the time, whether I'm going to go to the next phase, whether I'm going to go to that interview. And as Katya said, do take a moment to find yourself some peace and continue pushing forward. This is a process that may not happen on the first time, but it's something that you have to do when you are on STEM fields. Is that grit of looking ahead and moving forward has to be an important component of this faculty job search. We have a question on the chat regarding how to differentiate your research statements when you're applying to different departments. I'm going to take that as probably different institutions, but also sometimes you could apply to the same university and different departments for different faculty searches. So how do you guys have any experience with this, applying to different departments, how to differentiate your research statements?
I can start. This might not be the answer that you like, but I had a master version of every single one of the documents in my packet, and actually there were places in every single version that I changed for every job application. So there was one paragraph in my research statement where I was talking about kind of connections in the department, so that had to get tweaked for every single one. Not to mention changing for all the formatting requirements and specific things that each institution might want. So my advice would be make a master version that you're happy with, and then every single place you apply, you're going to have to make changes to it. I personally think that's the way to go about to be successful. I know there are people who don't do it. They submit the same thing everywhere. I can't speak to how well that works, but in the very least, your cover letter is going to have to change.
Yeah, I'll say too, yes, I did the same thing where, I mean, each application takes hours because you're personalizing it to each department. More broadly, I know very few people's kind of overall research project that they want to do, that they want to tackle, will fit perfectly into departments that are traditional across everywhere. So especially when you get more into science, biology, engineering, things like that, you're probably your program may fit somewhat with one department, but maybe another, maybe pathology, maybe neuro. There's certain areas that are just so. You can tailor that research statement to different types of departments, EME, whatever you want to do that. But the core question has to be the same. You can't change your entire lab trajectory based on what department will be there, because that'll be really obvious to the search committee that you're trying to that it's not your idea. Essentially, you need your core idea, and this just emphasize how you would approach that and how you would tackle those questions within the department that you're applying to. If you want to change a lot of your research statement to different broad departments, the broader you go, the less likely you're gonna get interviews. So that's that. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally echo that. My field, I do kind of like origin of planets. So I'm in the kind of intersection between astronomy and Earth and planetary sciences. So I applied to both institutes. And as just Nick said, the core questions I don't think for many people it won't change, unless you have like zillions of ideas that you have completely different versions of research statements. I think in that case, I think it's different. But at least for my case, I haven't had like a core questions I wanted to ask, and how you frame it can be different. So like, do I want it to make it interesting to how I started towards like people who work on like geology, who work on rocks. I'm basically more focused on like, studying for like earth surface processes related, and I would start the first paragraph in that sense. If I wanted to think more about like exoplanets, like extraterrestrial life, I would more start on like the astronomy side, like observations, and I will start differently. And again, I forgot who, but like as someone mentioned, writing the first paragraph is the most important part, I guess, because that kind of throwing your to make sure that they will keep reading the rest of our stuff. So it definitely takes a lot of time, but that's where I think I kind of tailored most when I applied to different institutes. But everything's basically landed on the same, from like third or fourth paragraph, it's basically the exact same thing, because the core questions I wanted to ask is always the same, and that's basically what I'm most passionate about. So that's something I was not able to change.
Just to add some more specifics, because I think Yoshi added a really nice specifics on different things. So I applied to more medical school based positions, and where I was emphasizing within my research statement, I was emphasizing translational approaches using clinical data, clinical samples, because that's the type of approach I could do in those places. But then there were also more traditional R1 places that required more teaching and more had less clinical resources, and so there I was emphasizing more mechanistic cell culture experiments, things, those kinds of approaches and questions that I can use there to answer those. So same overall idea, same overall research directions that I was talking about after that overall idea, but just in the approach emphasizing slightly different things on how I would work towards answering those questions within the context of that department. So that's hopefully similar.
I'll give another example for people. If you're mostly targeting R1s and you do some PUIs, you might not have PhD students. They might only have master students, and you're mostly gonna have undergrads in your lab. So the way I framed approaching problems really changed, and a lot of things were applied as like, this I would develop into a course, or this would be, how can you use people differently, change the scope of things. So definitely those are things to think about. Again, core questions didn't change, but maybe how I framed approaching them or the time scale I proposed doing things on did.
Thank you for that. I think that was a very insightful, those were very insightful answers. There is a question on the chat regarding how to support yourself through this process. It can take years to get a position, maybe more than one round. And so how do you financially support yourself through the process?
So I set out doing cardiovascular disease, which is highly competitive, mainly because there's so many financial opportunities to support yourself, and for the transition awards. And so the answer is apply to grants. There are lots of ways to do this. I know that the financial support for postdocs is somewhat limited when you're talking about, it's like, for me, it was it was 8 years almost 8 years as a trainee, essentially. But apply early and often for these financial awards that can help support your own research. And it doesn't hurt to find PIs who are willing to help fund you as well, and endear yourself through science to them so that they are happy to support you when you are not putting 100% of your time towards their research. Because these application processes take a long time, as you're alluding to. It is almost a full-time job applying to these positions and going on interviews and things like that. So financially supporting yourself requires a little bit of your own funding and a lot of support from your PIs.
So there's the NSF, PRFB, and the NRH, NRSA. Both of those are time limited based on when you complete your PhD. So definitely start applying for those early on so you don't get timed out of them. There's also good private foundations if it's applicable to you. The HHMI Hannah Gray's, it's very competitive, but it's very prestigious and it acts kind of like a K99. If you're further along, K99 is also really awesome and it'll open a lot of doors for you. So I think there's some really great lists. If you Google them or go on Twitter, people have made spreadsheets of like all of these postdoc fellowships that are available. In Canada, it's the NSERC Banting. Definitely like apply for those. My first year of my postdoc, like my first 6 months, I was just applying for fellowships. So definitely like kind of have to put in some of that groundwork. But it has the kind of dual benefit of hopefully you get funded, but also some of that might help you in writing your research statement as well.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Like as I said, I think as everybody said, keep applying. When you basic NSF for us, NASA, NOA, NOAA. Oh, they have plenty of postdoctoral fundings. It's really competitive, but they have a lot of opportunities. We in our field we don't have a transitional grant. But like at the same time, if you are vocal about what you want to do, in conferences and people sometimes come to you and say like, hey, do you want to work with us, work with me? So, um, you know, just keep trying. I think that's the only thing I can say.
Just to quickly add, because it comes up sometimes we talk about this. So the NIH routes they have lots of different funding mechanisms, especially starting with F32s if you're a postdoc, and then into all of the different K awards. And there are an enormous number of K awards for depending on your own background and where you want to go. There will be a K award for your situation. Whether you can get it or not is the tricky part. The thing that comes up though is that NIH is very restricted on international postdocs. So if you are not a U.S. citizen or a U.S. resident, then you're much more restricted on that. I do believe the K99 allows for international um, people to apply. So that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Nick. And there is a lot of private foundations, though, that allowed internationals to apply, and those informations are out there. And whenever I see one, I try to put it in the newsletter. So keep that in mind. It's at the bottom of the newsletter. And we do have one more question on the chat. Did you make backup plans? Like, if I don't get a faculty job this year, I'm going to go to do another postdoc or try again next year or go to industry. Did you had a backup plan in case it didn't work out?
I was at least trying to secure another postdoc or the funding yeah, every year before I start applying. But at least for um, my last year, I did not have a clear plan if I was to kind of fail this search this again this year. I'm actually when I was doing my third year of research, I was thinking about like, okay, this is my last year of doing this, but as you do it, you get some interviews and you have more ideas, passionate about. Like I wasn't able to give up, so I ended up doing again the next year. So that kind of like a backup plan or like didn't really wasn't really a actual backup plan, but yes, I totally understand how what you're asking that question because it is a very long and desperate kind of journey, and you never know until you actually get a job. So yeah, um, I think it is kind of sometimes important to think about that aspect because to keep you sane because this kind of long process could really drive you insane. So I don't know others, but that was at least my case.
Yeah, I'll just add, it's backup plans are tricky. Like calling them backup plans are a little tricky because all these jobs are competitive and tough to get at this position because you're essentially in a position where you want to drive science forward and do new things. And those positions are small. Are small in number, and independent faculty positions are definitely one way to do it. I know that the historical group's been saying like industry is a backup plan. It's not a backup plan. Industry is absolutely a tough job to get as well, and it's also a great job. So if that's something that you are considering, um, apply apply to every job that would progress your career. And that's if it's only faculty positions, then that's great. Do that way. If it's faculty or industry, then apply to industry jobs when you think you would be happy to take those or at least consider them, because they're also hard to get at this level as well. So it's I'm not sure I had a backup plan necessarily. I had different positions that I thought I would do well at, and I kept applying. The backup plan, I don't know if there were backup plans.
I definitely get the sentiment, definitely had those feelings of like, I don't know if I can do this again for sure. But I never made a backup plan. In part, maybe that was being naive, but I think a lot of it was just for myself in that moment to keep pushing forward and to kind of stay strong. I needed to believe that like I was going to be able to get through this and it was going to work. So I think there was some like very conscious not making a backup plan in my mind.
Yeah, one thing to add, when I actually was applying for postdoc, I was thinking about different directions. And as Nick said, applying for industry versus like it's a totally different experience. So you need different kind of skill sets and like a different preparation. So, saying a backup plan seems like an easy thing, but it's actually will take you not just a double, but like triple and like the quadruple effort to do it. So it might be a good idea sometime to if we're going for a direction, just kind of put a lot of energy in there, and if you wanted to go into direction, I think it's sometimes good to stop and think about what you really want to do, because applying for different fields is definitely not it's it's a really hard thing to do in terms of both your time and effort.
Yeah, thank you all for that. I think STEM, it's a still it's still during your training, whether that's grad student, whether that's postdoc, you're still being trained to apply to that faculty position. And so applying to the so-called alternative career paths are not so straightforward and can be as daunting and as difficult as applying for a faculty position. And so keep that in mind as you progress and have your backup plans in place. But I do appreciate the sentiment, since it's such a difficult career path and there's so few possibilities to actually get in that position at the end. So there's a couple more questions. One, it's a comment. Is it possible that the panelists can share their email addresses in case they have extra questions? Maybe they can reach out directly to you. Is that okay? Thank you. And I think we can either send that in a follow-up email after this is done. So can you maybe tell us what are some, so the job application, I think it's a learning process as well. And so what are some common pitfalls or mistakes that you have learned along the way that you should avoid when writing a research statement or applying for a faculty position?
I bombed my first interview. That's one of the pitfalls that I ran into was not applying early and often. So you're not going to get the first one because they're very hard to do. I was very wordy. I talked way too much, and that might have just been nerves. But it can be. Yeah, be very comfortable. So it's hard to be comfortable with your research, to talk about it succinctly and um, efficiently and full. Like you're you need practice at that, and you need practice in real situations at that. And so that was the pitfall I ran into, was I didn't have enough practice. But that's just what you, in your first interview, you're not going to have any practice. So um, that'd be my recommendation.
Definitely say practice your, elevator pitch, selling yourself, and practice it with people who are not in science and have no idea what you do, or like, I talked with people who had no idea, weren't in a lab, just really have to break it down, not use any jargon. If you can get them to understand, then you're golden. That takes a lot of work. And I would say, if you're in a field that does chalk talks like biology, that's the place that's going to make you or break you, really, if you get an in-person interview. So know that, what you put in your research statement, if you get an interview, you're not only going to have to present that, you are going to get grilled. You are going to have, some people might try to tear it apart. A lot of times for me, they're really good discussions, but they really are pressing you on things. That is hard to practice for, but it's a really good thing to practice for. And I drew out exactly what my whiteboards were going to look like, what my talking points were. Like that is really where you prove that you know what you're talking about, that you can interact with your colleagues, and that you are fundable.
I don't have much to add, but so I will answer it very in a different way. Pitfall is not is it's just, I know I'm saying something stupid, but not applying, because finding a job ad is also something you have to take and spend a time on. Nobody is gonna list every perfect list for someone. I know there's a lot of lists out there being compiled, but that doesn't cover everything. For your field, for your specific research, you might be able to apply for a slightly different field. And for those, you have to spend time and keep looking for it, and look for all job boards, because if you don't apply, you're definitely not going to get a job, and you'd never know which job is something that's going to be suited for you. So do spend a good amount of time, looking for job ads. I think that's the advice I can offer.
Thank you. I
Can
think
I lift Yoshi's comment up, because I was just reading about this, of how like certain groups of women, of people, women included, who like self-limit what they apply to. Don't do that to yourself. Don't feel like you need to be described perfectly in the job ad. If you can find something in there that you can connect to, apply for it. If you aren't sure, email the search committee and ask them, and give your little elevator spiel, or ask to have a quick Zoom call and find out if you would be a fit to apply for this job. Do not read it and think, oh, this isn't me, I'm not going to apply, because if you do that, you will never end up applying for anything.
yes, let them tell you no. I do appreciate all of these comments. I think these are great advice for all the people that are applying or thinking on applying. Do also remember that the PhD Plus team, it's available for individual advisement appointments, and we can go through your application and statements, and we will have sessions on interviewing for faculty positions, and other sessions on reviewing materials, so you can have that general public feedback as well from other disciplines and other people on different fields that are also applying for a faculty position currently. So is there anything, we're getting to the last of the couple minutes here, and so I wanted to ask one last piece of advice from your different perspectives. I know Nick took 2 years to finally sign that offer. Katia, I know you applied also to positions in Canada. Yoshi, I know you applied to different repetitive consecutive application process, and you did a postdoc, which is something very different on your field and than usual. So is there anything else that you would like to add that will be helpful for the people that are currently applying?
Sure, I can add quickly. So thinking about research statements and things like that, the big question that I think you have to, because as I mentioned, search committees are going to read hundreds of research statements and try to pull just one thing from your statement that can define you, which is hard. And as scientists, I think we fight that idea of being defined by one thing. But that's what you have to do in the research statement, and uh, you're trying to convey what are you going to be the professor of. So if you're going to run your lab, what are you going to be the professor of? There are plenty of people that you know who are the professor of stroke research, professor of for us it would be fibroblasts and heart or things like that. You have to convey what you are going to be as the expert in your field, and that's hard to do. But if you have that idea from the start when you're writing it, that's really what you're trying to do in the intro and the big part of the research statement.
We've been talking a lot about how stressful this all is. So I guess my twist on this will be to try to have fun with it. It's actually like really exciting to dream about what your lab is going to be like and what your research program is going to be. And like that's kind of why we're all here, is because we like thinking about that. So try to remember those feelings and have fun. And if you do get to the interview stage, I actually had a great time. I thought it was really fun. I made good connections. I got to meet people I wouldn't have necessarily have ever met, say at a conference or something in my area. So I think try to remember like we actually do love what we're doing, and there's a reason you're putting yourself through this, and keep those positives and enjoy it.
I feel like that's a great advice. From my perspective, I think it's important to seek out help from all directions, your friends, and I didn't say advice to my advisors, but like, for faculty members who are willing to help. Everybody will provide different types of comments, and everybody's really willing to help because they all know how stressful this journey can be. I also had a lot of help from people like Fatima. I didn't know. For my case, it was the Office for Postdoc Affairs at Caltech, but everybody's has been extremely helpful, and everybody's really willing to help. So, I as it's a very stressful journey. I think it's important that you reach out to a lot of people, and everybody's can will be really supportive. So, though if as you feel daunted, talk to people and get help. I think that would be a really great motivation for keep on going.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. There is a couple extra questions. Katya, I was wondering if you can share a little bit about your non-US application, maybe a couple of tips and bits on how that is different from a US application.
Yeah, so I can speak to Canada. Do your research on what the funding system is, especially if you haven't been a postdoc or a PhD student or come from that country, to make sure that you're saying the appropriate things and putting in the appropriate, types of proposals and that kind of stuff. That's one place that can catch you up. The other thing I'll just say, as a non-Canadian resident applying, that did make some additional challenges. So do know where you're applying, if preference is given to citizens and permanent residents, and like gauge your expectations accordingly, and be prepared to talk about how you would apply for permanent residency and that kind of thing. So it does add kind of an extra layer on, not necessarily for the research statement as much per se, but like in your cover letter you might have to put a little bit more effort into explaining like why you should be considered as a top applicant.
Thank you, Katya. Joshi, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how is it to apply as an international to US-based institutions for the faculty position?
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't really find a lot of differences. I mean, I did my PhD over here, and I did my postdoc here. So basically, I was already in the U.S. for like a little less than 10 years, and um, they I don't think they really cared about my nationality that much of them being international. But at the same time, it does come up in a sense that your funding it will be limited. Funding situation will be limited, so you will have some disadvantages in that aspect. So if you can get a green card early, I think that will help your your journey much easier, and it will never hurt to have those. So it's not related to your job search, but thinking about your really long term, getting those kind of residency green card will absolutely will be an important step towards getting a your funding or getting a faculty position. It could be so. Definitely to keep in mind about those stamps as well. If you are thinking about staying in the United States in the long term.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Nick, I know you were doing a lot of professional development for fellows on BME as well as applying for positions. And so tell me a little bit about balancing that, research work, extra work with the professional development groups and applying for positions.
Yeah, part of the aspects of being a PI is that you have to balance all of that kind of work. And if anything, it's interesting in that as a postdoc, you get to just do the research, everything we've been talking about. As a PI, you don't do the research anymore. You're now mentoring other people to do that. It just generally it felt as a postdoc, it felt very weird trying to apply to positions where I didn't actually have the expertise I needed, even though they weren't even evaluating that expertise. And so I found all of the kind of training in all of the other aspects of leadership that's been talked about, scientific writing, budget management, how to hire and fire people, all of those aspects of being a manager that we don't normally get taught when we're postdocs was just as valuable in trying to get to these positions. So I felt it was just part of my training as a postdoc on an academic a career path. So balancing it is tough. That's that's just time management and what you feel during that day is during that day and week is the best efforts in your time. But that's how I felt. Why I justified spending that time and effort to learn those aspects, and I think it paid off in the actual interviews and actually meeting people where I felt more comfortable in my ability to start a research program because that's what you're trying to promote, what you're trying to do. It's not just another place to do research. You're building a program where you're teaching other people to do what you do. And I felt more comfortable explaining how I was going to do that, having all of that training. So I think it's an integral part of this process. And so that's how I justified spending the time.
Thank you so much. Just one follow up, maybe if you can't, if you're willing, we would love to have your research statements for your current positions so we can share maybe with the having them as examples for our next series and building up our bank of research statements from people like you that have been successful on this search will be really helpful. And with that, I just want to say thank you again for joining us today. I think we had a lot of questions and your insight has been very helpful to everyone in the call. If there's any follow-up questions, please do let us know. And for all the participants, I just added on the chat the contact information for our panelists today. So you have that in case you want to discuss any follow-up questions. And thank you so much for lending your time today, panelists. I think it has been great. And just before we go, please do remember to do the evaluation as you're walking out. Just scan that QR code. It will take you less than 5 minutes to share your feedback and ideas for future sessions. And we do appreciate those and take those into consideration when building the program for next year and for future sessions.